Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. It's time for another How I Ran a Domain of Dread video. I love doing these videos. This is going to be two parts, similar to my Forlorn videos. So this is everything up to Hazlik's tower, Veneficus, which is the base. And then part two is just going to be his tower, which hopefully will be in a few weeks' time, because I can't see that being more than just a few sessions, even though it's 25 floors. I'll give my usual disclaimers. This is kind of like an ideas dump. So this isn't like a, run this adventure from this starting point to this end point, from these levels. It's more of, if you're thinking of running Hazlan and homebrewing some stuff, I essentially expand on the domain. Here are some extra maps you can use beyond the main Hazlan map. Here are some additional adventure ideas. Here are boatload more monsters and things like that. So the idea of it is that you use the info in Van Richten's guide and its suggestions of monsters from Van Richten's guide and the monster manual, but hey, here's a ton more. I'm not going to go too heavy into the lore. This assumes you maybe read the information about Hazlan. I will talk a little bit about Hazlan and Hazlan's deal, but I might just talk about stuff as if you already know it. So if you're watching this and I start talking about something and you're like, who's that or what's that? You might have to dive into the book. This video is probably going to be long without me stopping and explaining every single thing. And also, my play is at level 16. That's like tier 3, nearly tier 4 play. So some of the monsters I'm going to suggest later on are quite a high challenge rating. If you're doing Hazlan for a much lower level party, sort of below level 10, you might want to change or tone down some stuff. Or maybe in some cases I'll say, oh, I include 2 of these enemies, you just include 1. I should say as well that if you are only interested in one aspect of what I'm talking about, so you just want more map suggestions, more adventure suggestions, more monster suggestions, I've put timestamps in the time bar below in the description, and you'll see it in the bar as well. So if you just want to jump to one part of the video instead of watching it start to finish, feel free to do that. Right, before I get into things, there's some spoiler warnings as well. Not that many, but I wanted to mention that I pretty much used a Kandlekeep Mysteries adventure and managed to place it into Hazlan with a few changes. The adventure in particular is called Kandlekeep Dekonstruktion. It's the one where it's spelt all the C's are K's. So there's actually a spoiler as well for the Honor Among Thieves D&D movie that came out a couple of years ago. So in Van Richten's guide, Hazlik's stat block, he's the Darklord, Hazlik's stat block is Archmage, but I changed it to be one of the characters from the movie because what they did is they put out what's called Thieves Gallery, which is a small source of just a few stat blocks and magic items of characters and items from the movie, and I used one of the character stat blocks. And it's kind of a spoiler if you're bothered by that. And I wouldn't say this is a spoiler, but there's lots of monsters from Tome of Beasts, number 1. I did a video all about Tome of Beasts monsters you can add to Ravenloft, and there are so many that work really well in Hazlan. There might be a couple of others, but I'm drawing a blank. Apologies if I reveal anything. Just have to forgive me on that. Let's talk about sources of information. Van Richten's guide is the obvious one. I always like to dive onto Mrpedia, it's like the Ravenloft wiki, which is mostly, if not almost entirely, pre-5th edition lore. So looking at the sort of 2nd edition and 3rd edition versions of Hazlan. Grezanletyr number 1. These, I believe, are 3rd edition. They're kind of like sort of booklets that contain additional information about domains. Grezanletyr number 1 has information about Hazlan. I found that handy for fleshing out the towns. I did general sort of Red Wizard of Thay research, given that Hazlik is a evil Red Wizard of Thay. I don't know why I used the word evil. They're all evil. I don't think I needed to put the word evil there. I found some interviews on YouTube. If I find them, and if there's space in the description, I'll include some links, but feel free to Google them yourself. There were some interviews with F. Wesley Schneider, who was the project lead on Van Richten's guide. There was at least one, if not 2 interviews where he talks about Hazlan. And the classic line he uses is, an evil wizard did it. That's basically Hazlan's deal. There's something weird going on in the domain, you can probably blame it on an evil wizard. Obligatory mentions go to Hour of the Raven, his videos about Hazlan, albeit they were older edition, although I think he does talk about one that's like 5th edition changes. And PhD&D as well did a video about Hazlan, so obligatory mentions to them. If there's room in the description, I'll add them in because there's kind of like a limit. And I'm going to include lots of links to things like Reddit posts and maps, but if there's room, I'll add them in. Otherwise, you can search for them on their channels. And as mentioned, I left quite a few posts on the Ravenloft subreddit asking for people's advice and help. I'll include links to those in the description. Talk about the domain as a whole next. Hazlan's a bit of a funny one, or at least 5th edition Hazlan is, because it's in Van Richten's guide, Ravenloft's a horror setting, as we all know, but it doesn't feel very horror-y. It's a lot tamer than other domains. You think of like Barovia with vampires, Darkon with a lich, maybe not, Lemordia's Frankenstein deal. But yeah, Hazlan is, you know, it's just evil wizards doing evil wizard thing, and it's ruled by a Red Wizard of Thay. It's kind of borderline, but I think, you know, you can obviously make it horrible depending on what kinds of depraved, awful, evil experiments the people do. What I love about Hazlan in 5th edition is the wild magic surges. I'm a huge fan of the chaos and randomness of wild magic. I actually play a wild magic sorcerer. He's here! My Gem Dragonborn Sorcerer Ami. Where's the camera? There's the camera. Zoom out a bit. A big fan of wild magic and that kind of thing. So rolling the d10 anytime someone casts magic was a lot of fun. We did get some wild magic surges, which I'll talk about in a minute. This is different to pre-5th edition. I believe, you know, pre-5th edition was ruled by Hazlik, who is a Red Wizard of Thay, but didn't have all the wild magic shenanigans. I made a note of when people cast magic, what they cast, if it was a magic item, and so on, so that Hazlik knew what items they used. For example, when the Wizard PC used his Staff of the Magi, which I'll talk about later with Hazlik's goals, he wanted that staff. And he talks all about this in Van Richten's Guide, about how he can sort of sense when magic is cast and magic items and things like that. And there are the Eyes of Hazlik as well, which are sort of the domain's good luck charms, where if you wear them openly on your body, and it could be like an amulet, it could be like a tattoo, then you can suppress the d10 roll on the wild magic surge if you get a 1. Speaking of wild magic surges, if you get a 1 on the d10, you roll a d20. Anything above a 6 or higher, is unique stuff, and then if you get a 1 to 5, it's the classic wild magic surge table from the player's handbook. We ended up getting a self fireball. So sort of fireball centered on yourself, bang. That was ironically the person was trying to heal at the time. 2 portals to random other parts of the domain. 2 fog clouds cast on oneself. Improved magic for 1 minute. It happened twice. In one case it was any enemies had disadvantage on saving throws, and the other time it was, I think it's a quickening, where it's like spells that usually require an action can be cast on a bonus action. Ironically, both those happened in times where combat wasn't happening. Somebody nearby was poisoned, and one from the Hazlan table specifically, which is the shrieking, skinless, many-limbed horror that has statistics of and vaguely resembles unicorn. That's how we ended our previous section, just as they're about to go into Hazlik's tower. So they got to fight that thing before they even go in. Fun, 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 fun. Let's talk about Hazlik next, the Darklord. So stat block-wise, as teased earlier, I didn't use the Archmage, which is what's suggested in Van Richten's Guide, and this is where we get into Honor Among Thieves spoilers. I used the Sofina stat block. She's the main villain of Honor Among Thieves. She's a Red Wizard of Thay, and she's a higher challenge rating than Archmage and has some pretty devastating attacks and spells. However, I used the information in Van Richten's Guide that says Hazlik can't learn new spells or change his spell list. So the Sofina stat block is accompanied with magic items. I gave him a bag of holding because of his art. He's got like a satchel that looks like it could be a bag of holding. A Master's Amulet, because he controls a Shield Guardian. It's the amulet for controlling Shield Guardian. An Orb of Dragonkind. I think this was an idea from one of my Reddit posts, so thank you for that. This is the orb that is at the end of his staff as per his art. A Periaptive Health. A Staff of Adornment. This is to match the art of the floating orb, and it's just like the staff. It's basically a Staff of Adornment that lets you like float an item. Wand of Fireballs. And Wand of Magic Missiles. Got a feeling that those two are from older lore, or at least the Wand of Fireballs is. I also had him attuned to a Mighty Servant of Luke-O, which is from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Again, not sure if I pronounced that right. Which is just essentially this giant like sort of mech. I'm still torn about using this, but depending on how the final battle goes, it might be a couple of phases, at least 2. A third phase, the middle phase, might be that he goes inside this Mighty Servant of Luke-O and basically hits the PCs hard with that. And in the Sofina stat block, it says he wears a magic robe that grants him a +2 bonus to AC and a +1 bonus to saving throws. That's baked into the stat block. I'd say that's kind of unique to him. So say if they defeat him and the robe is there, it only works for Hazlik, it doesn't work for other people. So as mentioned, my players are level 16, so this might be too strong for lower level players. That's why I've kind of beefed it up. And I also wanted to save the Archmage for other NPCs, so I'm using it for Firan, Firan zal'honan, who does make an appearance in this later. I'll talk about that later. Firan, I made an Archmage but with Lich spells for story reasons, and I talk about it more in my dedicated Firan video. And Petrina as well, who was revived in Barovia as per Curse of Strahd. She can be revived by her brother Casimir. She's an Archmage as well, I believe. It does say in the information that Hazlik is unaffected by wild magic surges, that the domain does, so he doesn't have to do his pesky d10 rolls. And he's, and I touched on this earlier, he's aware of any spell or magic item used within 30 feet of an eye of Hazlik. Plus he knows the spell level and item rarity, so that's cool. Even if the Eye of Hazlik is hidden, like it's not openly worn, then he can still sense it, I think is the interpretation I got there. If it's worn openly, then people can do the thing where they can suppress the D10 roll, and he can use his ability where he can cast Arcane Eye through it as well. And the Arcane Eye thing, wow, he can do that at any time and for as long as he pleases, so it's almost like infinite spying, and I think that's really cool. I think it says in the information for him as well that he doesn't need to get much sleep or doesn't get much sleep, so he can spy a lot. You can probably justify that any time the players are not long resting, he could be spying on them so long as there's an Eye of Hazlik nearby. In terms of role-playing him, I used the info from Recton's guide. I made him sort of very changeable, jittery, unsettling is probably the word I'd use. I also made him soft-spoken. So I think I saw in one of the Hour of the Raven videos, or maybe it was some information I found elsewhere, maybe Misterpedia, that he tends to have like this sort of commanding, domineering, booming voice. But I like the idea that, especially from the art makes him look quite sort of scrawny. I like the idea that he's quite soft-spoken. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I think it's kind of almost expected that scary villains have big booming voices. But I like the idea that he's quite soft-spoken. I find that quite unsettling. I think my players found that quite unsettling as well. When he met the PCs, I'll talk about this later, he mostly addressed the wizard PC. So I've got a wizard, a paladin, and a rogue. And he mostly addressed the wizard PC because he kind of considered him an equal, sort of. And there was a funny moment where he thought the other PCs were his servants because he explains, this is a magocracy. Wizards are at the top, and then everyone else is below. I also gave him an entourage of a shield guardian, a familiar, which was disguised as a toad, was actually like a spellcasting bullywug, a homunculus, and some other constructs as well. I think I used moonlight guardians, which I think are from Vecna's Eve of Ruin. I'll talk more about this in the next video, the part 2 video. And his goals are, he's got 2 main goals. The first one is to get the wizard PC staff. The wizard has a Staff of the Magi, it's a legendary thing, has lots of spells it can do, lots of charges it can have. So Hazlik, realizing that there's someone in his domain who has that, he's like, I want that, that's mine now. And he wants to escape the domain as well. And I'll talk about this more later, possibly in the part 2 video. He's managed to get the apparatus, which started out in Mordant, then was moved to Darkon, and then he sent Eleni, one of his apprentices, and some people to bring it to Hazlan, and it's in his tower, and he's going to try and use it to escape the domain, but what he doesn't know is that it's incomplete, and it's not going to go well for him if he tries to use it. Maps next. So for the domain, I used the one from Richton's guide. For other places within the domain, there's a cartographer called the Mad Cartographer. I've talked about them before in my Valachan video, and they've done a bunch of Curse of Strahd locations, I believe, but they've also done almost all of the disaster sites in Hazlan. So there's a little subsection of locations in Van Richten's guide and the Hazlan info that talks about disaster sites, and they've done maps of I think all but one of them. So there's the Brew, there's the Fleshless Forest, Moonstone Valley with day and night variations, and with or without the meteor in the middle, the Orbitoclasts, the Players, and Seething. And then for Toyalis, I found this map on Incarnate of somebody's take of Toyalis in 5th edition, based on how it looks in the 5th edition map, where it's got the river that splits into 2. The map for Sly-Var, this was a funny one. I really struggled to find something I liked, and I noted that it had lots of bridges. It said knotted bridges. And I think I posted on Reddit, and someone brought to my attention an old Toyalis map, funny enough, from one of the older editions that had loads of bridges. And so I changed the name on the map to say instead of Toyalis, it was Sly-Var. And I added a sand sea. So this is inspired by Final Fantasy XII. Me and 2 of my 3 players are big Final Fantasy fans. There is a sand sea in one of the regions of the map, and I really like the idea that a mage was experimenting. It's that whole thing of, they didn't have to do it, but they wanted to do it. They wanted to see if they could do it, and they essentially turned the water supply, the lake and the rivers in Sly-Var into just sand water, essentially. And one of the quests, which I'll talk about later, tries to deal with reverting that back to proper water. And I did a thing with the map where I tinted it yellow, and then later on, when they sorted out the sand sea problem, it turned back to blue when I used the regular map. Ramulai, I found this cool Incarnate map of a sort of Hazlan-y style looking town with a mine baked into the mountain. For the inn in Toyalis, I used Chepeku, I think that's how it's pronounced, their Twisted Tavern map, the desert variant. It even has eyes on things like there's a rug behind the bar, and in other places. It's perfect. It's like the person made this for Hazlan. It couldn't be more perfect. I was so chuffed when I found it. But that was the main inn in Toyalis, which I believe was called the Sorcerer's Head, or at least that's the name I used for it, which I found on Misterpedia. If there were random encounters in just random spots of Hazlan, I used a very simple dungeon draft map. It took really like a minute to make, where it's essentially one of the ground or terrain settings is, in addition to things like grass and sand, is essentially like a barren wasteland. I didn't even put things like little dead trees or stones, because my justification was the domain has been so damaged by magic that even, you know, it's literally just nothing left. The land is about to fall apart. It is barren. Even stones and dead trees, they're not even there. I don't know, it made designing the map a lot more simple, but it made it harder for the rogue who couldn't hide behind stuff, maybe. Although they did have a friend who was a huge construct that she could hide behind, which I'll talk about later. Veneficus, that's Hazlik's tower. I also use my cartographer for that. They have 2 map packs called Endless Wizard Tower Maps, but I'll talk more about that in my part 2 video. And others as I go. If I've not covered a map here, I might show a map or talk about a map as I say they get to a certain place. If I don't talk about a map and you want to know what map I used, let me know in the comments. I'll see if I can find it and link to it. Music next. So you'll know from my other videos I'm a big fan of tabletop audio, which is kind of baked into Roll20 as standard. So for the world map, I used Aftermath, which sounds a bit sci-fi-esque, which I think kind of works because it's not sci-fi, but it kind of works for the whole weird domain, weird alien magical things going on, if you get me. And then for the battle music, I used a song called Sand Raiders, which again sounds a bit sci-fi. I suppose if you're doing Harukia, this could work well for that as well, but I thought it worked well for Hazlan. For the settlements, I used different songs. One was called The Strange, another one was Oasis City, and another one Moisture Farm. I should mention as well, I tend to use music-only versions, so there's no weird ambience and sounds in the background. For the Ramulai mine, I used Red Sky Mine. For Hazlik and his tower, when they went there and met him the first time, I played Collegium Magica, just kind of like this sort of fancy magical sounding music, but a little bit unsettling. And then for others, I might not play them through this video and I might not mention what they are, but I just changed them depending on where they were. So for example, when they went to the Brew, I found some good swamp music. Again, like I said with the maps, if you want recommendations of what songs I use for certain places, let me know and I'll see if I can dig them out and let you know. Okay, on to mages and monsters. Sounds like a sort of knockoff of Dungeons and Dragons, doesn't it? Mages and monsters, I'm going to do mages first. So I used a lot of mage NPC stat blocks from a bunch of sources beyond the monster manual. Let's talk about the 3 main apprentices first. So in Van Richten's guide, it says how he has 3 main mages. There's Eleni, who I believe appears in the Order Lore, and then 2 new ones, Ruzello and Jarl the Skygazer. I did a Reddit post asking people's thoughts on this, so chances are what I'm talking about now might be people's suggestions, so thank you if you're one of the people who suggested stuff. I should explain that as I talk about later on about how it played out, they've not met any of these 3 apprentices yet, but I got their stat blocks ready, and I think at least one of them might be in the tower, helping Hazlik out as well. So for Eleni, I used the Evoker, that's from Volo's Guide to Monsters, updated in Mordenkainen and presents Monsters of the Multiverse. I think I read on Mrpedia that she has a Aarakocra/Barbarian familiar that often takes the form of a hawk. So I got that ready. And it says in Van Richten's guide that she's controlling a purple worm called Grave Drinker, who's a white purple worm, an albino purple worm. So potentially give her that as well. Ruzello, I chose Shadarkai Gloomweaver, that's from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse. Jarl the Skygazer, I was considering one of the Star Spawn options, but didn't choose which one. I was considering maybe the Lava Mage, but figured it probably needs Disguise Self, because I think it'd be a bit too obvious if it's just dropping little worms everywhere. So there were also sort of more minor apprentices who I had as like a traveling group. They were with Firan zal'honan, who is, I'll talk about in a minute, one of the hooks that got the players into Hazlan. I used a Dragon Blessed from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, and she had a Pseudo-Dragon Familiar from the Monster Manual. A Drow Mage from the Monster Manual. Hobgoblin Devastator from Volo's Guide to Monsters, Monsters of the Multiverse, who had a Dust Mephit Familiar from the Monster Manual. The Regular Mage stat block from the Monster Manual. The Rakshasa from the Monster Manual. And then Firan was there with his familiar Skiva. Firan is an Archmage, although the version I went with was Archmage with Lich Spells, and Skiva is his Imp familiar, who often takes the form of a raven. And then I had a couple of other spellcasters as well. So I had a scenario in the inn the one time they went where 2 mages are having an argument and start fighting each other, and one of them was a Githyanki Gish, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse, and one was a Warlock of the Great Old One from Volo's Guide to Monsters, Monsters of the Multiverse. Next up, monsters. Oh boy, have I got a list for you. So, not counting ones that were already in Van Richten's guide, such as Purple Worms and Grimishkas. Assume I used those. Oh, before I get into it, almost all of these are from Tome of Beasts. In alphabetical order, A to Z, the Chalicaray, if that's how that's pronounced. I had that as a random encounter, and has this great attack. It's a bonus action called Siphon Magic, where if it has a spellcaster grappled, it has the opportunity to absorb their magic, and the player loses a spell slot. And then if that happens, they regain their rechargeability magical discharge, where they can do a burst of force damage magic on people. Great. Deathcat Myconid from Tome of Beasts. I put this in the Brew. Doppelrat from Tome of Beasts. This was a quest at the inn. The innkeeper said, oh, I think I've got a rat problem, can you help me out? And it was a Doppelrat, and in return for doing that, I think she gave them a magical staff and offered them free bed and board. A Dragonblood Ooze from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. I didn't use this, but I plan to. Dune Mimic from Tome of Beasts. Edemu, if that's how it's pronounced, from Tome of Beasts. These are like sort of sand monsters that can fly. I added this to the Sly-Var Sand Sea, had it sort of float up from the sand and attack. Elemental Locus, also in Sly-Var. This is also from Tome of Beasts. This is the cause of the Sand Sea being a Sand Sea. Emerald Eye, Tome of Beasts. Eye Golem from Tome of Beasts. It is a golem covered in eyes. Perfect. This was a scheme that Hazlik did where he would try to lure the players into a trap, and then he could watch it all. He could watch the monster try and kill them. Beautiful. The mine map, which I'll show later, had a ton of money in the corner. Instead of hiding it and covering up, I decided that it was a Horde Mimic from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, although I did see the Horde Golem from Tome of Beasts, that could have been an option. And some of the gold, which wasn't actually gold, was swarms of Horde Scarabs from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. In the Eberron book, there are living spells. There's Living Burning Hands, Living Cloud Kill, Living Lightning Bolt. This was one of the bounties from an NPC where essentially they cast some spells and they came to life. Perfect. Mordant Snare from Tome of Beasts. Oculo Swarm of Tome of Beasts. This thing is like a floating mass of eyeballs, and it can extract eyes from people. Grim, but beautiful. An Oozasis, or Ooze Oasis, is absolutely enormous ooze that takes the form of a lake and then attacks. Beautiful. Quicksilver Siege Orb from Tome of Beasts. These are like flying, floating constructs that can either take the form of an orb or a disc, like a saw. Rift Swine, Tome of Beasts. Salt Golem, Tome of Beasts. Snowstorm, Tome of Beasts. Smaragdine Golem, Tome of Beasts. This is a bounty they didn't end up doing. Spark, Tome of Beasts. Stone Cursed from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse. I added these to the Fleshless Forest. Swarm of Fire Dancers, Tome of Beasts. Thule? I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry. Tome of Beasts, this was a bounty in Seething. Valachera from Flea Mortals. I added these to the Brew as a bounty. And Zorn from the Monster Manual. These are in the mine, as I'll explain later. I'll mention more when I do the tower as well. There's even more I found that I thought would be better suited for the tower than for Hazlan at large. And so you'll see those in part 2. And I did a table and put it on Reddit, a random encounter table, where a bunch of these appear. If you want to take a look, I'll include a link in the description. And I should mention as well, I'll include a link in the description for this, there was a DM's Guild resource I used called Random Encounters of Ravenloft, where somebody has like a D20 table for every single domain of Dread, or at least all the main ones, from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and then sort of a just general Ravenloft table as well, if it's a different domain or you need something for like a mist encounter that isn't tied to a specific domain from their list. Next, let's talk about hooks. So when they first heard about Hazlan, they heard it from Vilnius, an NPC in Curse of Strahd. He's in the Amber Temple in Barovia. I homebrewed that him and his master, so their backstory was that they were originally from Darkon, but then Jakarian wanted to go to Hazlan and meet Hazlik, and Hazlik gave them the quest to go to the Amber Temple in Barovia. And then it played out pretty much similarly to how it is in Curse of Strahd. Jakarian was killed by the Flame Skulls, and Vilnius is hiding in the theatre at the lecture hall to the east. They didn't like Vilnius. I roleplayed him, as it suggested in Curse of Strahd, as just being very cowardly, very nasty, really an unlikable fellow, very unappreciative as well. They essentially save his life and he never says thank you, that kind of thing. He was so much fun to play, and my players hated him as well. They absolutely despised him. It was beautiful. But later on, when they went to the carnival one time, they meet this magical Loxodon called Ilvi. And what they don't know, or at least they've not said So it might be that they know, the players know, or they got a theory, but what they don't know, or at least what the PCs don't know, is this is Vilnius reincarnated. So basically what happened was when they left the Amber Temple, they parted ways with Vilnius. Vilnius went back and took a whole bunch of dark gifts, one of which was reincarnate. There is the standard reincarnation table, like the spell, but I found one where I think it's critical role that includes lots more races. And I rolled and he became a Loxodon. So he reincarnated into a Loxodon because when he went back to Hazlik and Hazlan with a Shield Guardian, which they missed in the Amber Temple, but Vilnius later found, and he's already wearing the Master's Amulet, as per the information in Curse of Strahd, he goes back and basically challenges Hazlik, and Hazlik kills him. But what Hazlik doesn't realise is that he reincarnates into a Loxodon. I think it says within 5 feet of the body, and I had it to be on the floor below. So Vilnius comes back to life and immediately plummets like 10 or 20 feet onto the floor below. He escapes and he goes to the carnival. And his logic is he really wants to get revenge on Hazlik and wants to defeat Hazlik, and he can't do it alone. So when he meets the PCs, he says, oh, I was a Hazlik apprentice, I escaped, he tried to kill me. If you want to go and defeat him, I'll be your guide. I've got a map, blah, blah, blah. I played him still very similar to how I played Vilnius, but one of the dark gifts in the Amber Temple increases your charisma, so I kind of played it that he was a bit more friendly. And because he was a Loxodon, they were like, oh, you're so cute, you're like an elephant person. So I don't know if that was the players the whole time have been like, yeah, he's definitely Vilnius, or if they genuinely don't know. And they really like Ilvi, up until the point he disappeared, which I'll talk about later on. And the reason I call him Ilvi as well is because I purposely did it similar to Vilnius, not only as a clue, but just in case I said the wrong name. Because if I called him Clive, and then I said Vilnius, it's like, oh, whoops. But if I say Vilnius, I'll be like, oh, sorry, Vilnius, Ilvi, they're very similar, and probably get away with it. In Curse of Strahd, he's the mage stat block, plus I gave him additions based on the dark gifts he took, and the various flaws that you get, or consequences of taking the dark gifts. One of them is like you have oily, hairy skin, so I said he was like mammoth stock. He has like weird eyes, or voidless eyes, so he wears goggles of night to cover that up. It's Carnival NPC. One of the Litwick Market people has a stall where they do prosthetics. Gave one of the PCs a prosthetic limb after they lost an arm in Valachan, the whole of the story. And he said, oh, a new guy came here and I gave him dentures because he didn't have any teeth. Because one of the dark gift things is you lose all your teeth, and so on and so forth. And then they heard about Hazlik and Hazlan generally. I can't remember the circumstances, but I'm sure it got mentioned one or two other times beyond meeting Vilnius and then later meeting Ilvi. And then the trigger for them to go to Hazlan was Madame Eva visited them, I think it was after Forlorn, and she said Firan zal'honan has gone missing. Now this requires a bit of context. They received a second Taroka reading when I started this post-Curse of Strahd wider Ravenloft campaign, and Madame Eva believes the person who gave it was Hiskoza, who in the older lore, and I think is mentioned in 5th edition, is a male Vistana, and his Taroka readings are tied to wider prophecies, or even like can call, sort of signal doom and gloom, basically. So Madame Eva and Firan are researching what's going on. When it's time, they'll say, oh, we think we figured it out, and it'll lead to the end game in Darkon. So Madame Eva introduced them to Firan in the past, and Firan helped them clear out most of the Amber Temple and helped them defeat Baba Lysaga. This was stuff that they kind of did after Curse of Strahd finished, after they defeated Strahd, kind of tying up loose ends. And I play Firan as quite nice, quite friendly to them, so they liked Firan, and he's powerful and friendly. The wizard liked him because the wizard, he's a fellow wizard, stuff like that. So when they heard that their friend Firan had gone missing, and Madame Eva says, I think he's in Hazlan, because I think he heard a rumour that Hazlik is similar to him, can't learn new spells, can't change spells. They felt obliged to want to prioritise going to Hazlan and try and find him and rescue him. They were wondering about Hazlan's issues with the wild magic surges, and she said, Firan's a very capable individual, but he's going somewhere where magic can be quite out of control and you might be reluctant to cast magic. So they were like, right, we best go and help him. And at that point, they were like, well, we might as well recruit Ilvi. Ilvi wants to go back to Hazlan. He can be our guide. He can give us a map. And so they went to the carnival, swung by the carnival, got Ilvi, and then headed to Hazlan. Adventure, quest board, and bounty ideas. So in addition to the adventure ideas in Van Richten's guide, I did a quest board in the inn in Toyalis, which is a mix of mini quest ideas and bounties. The quest givers and bounty givers were in Toyalis, Ramulai, Sly-Var. One of them was actually one of the minor mages that was with Firan. There were a number of quests. what I'll do is, instead of detailing what all the quests and things were, I did a Reddit post asking for people's advice and asking for ideas, and then I also mentioned the ones I had ideas for, so I'll link to that in the description. But there were bounties of various different types of monsters, some of the ones I mentioned earlier, and various quests which varied in different natures. Find my missing pet ooze, which was the ooze-asis, and things like that. And all of them had rewards tied to them as well, and some of them were more useful than others. One of them was like a magical staff, one of them was one of the Tasha's magical spell books, one of them was just literally like a pile of coins. Right, now I'll talk about how it played out in my campaign. So they arrived with Ilvi via the southeast near Glutton Cattle, the Last Wood and Obsession's End. As they're getting their bearings, a Hellfire engine arrives and approaches them. I didn't mention this in my monster list because it's quite a unique one. So this is from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse. I got this idea from the Adventures idea list where it says they find a sapient war machine, and the suggestion in the book is Iron Golem. My players have fought an Iron Golem before, and I thought it'd be more interesting finding this Hellfire engine. So this terrifying looking hellish machine approaches them and then stops in front of them, and in a very soft spoken voice says, "Excuse me, can you help me? I'm a little bit lost and a little bit scared." Didn't have a name. You said he was in Obsession's End. His two creators just left him there to rot, and he got confused and lost. They named him Yortzed, which is destroy backwards, or Yort for short. It was interesting because he's a very powerful being. Like, to have that as an ally NPC would have trivialized a lot of encounters, but my players were kind of sympathized with him, and he kind of explained that he doesn't like to hurt people. He's a bit of a pacifist, and so they didn't want to force him to attack people, basically. They were like, "We'll help you, we'll try and find you somewhere to go," and he was like saying, "I just want to be," almost like Thomas the Tank Engine, "I want to be a really useful engine. I just want to help people. I don't want to be this war machine. I want to do useful stuff." So they were like, "We'll help you. We'll take you places, and maybe you'll find what you need, or we'll think of somewhere you can go, maybe outside of Hazlan." So he tagged along for a little while. They long rested near Toyalis, and then went to Toyalis and left York by the Black Spire, which is included in the map I used, which in older editions of Ravenloft, I think, was some sort of portal to Blurtspur, if that's how it's pronounced. That's like the Mind Flayer domain. But I hadn't quite decided what it was going to do, and then he was only left by it for a brief amount of time, so I was kind of like, I'll leave it for now and think about what it could do, but didn't in the end. But I thought about it might, make him go wild or confused and maybe like randomly attack people, but I didn't do anything with that in the end. When they went to the inn, they met the new owner. So it was this new owner who was like, "I'm just taking over the inn." Got it at a good price because the previous owner was like, screw this place, screw Hazlan. It came with a animated armor. I found this really cool art of a animated armor that looks like a bartender making cocktails and stuff, so I used that. And there was a tiefling helper as well, and sort of a scout and a postwoman who is actually a were-raven. One of the Keepers of the Feather. So they met her later on, and Keepers of the Feather and were-ravens tend to be quite secretive, but she's quite excitable, and I had her like, especially because two of my three PCs are were-ravens, and she's like, "Oh my god, you guys are were-ravens as well, I can talk to you about it," and did do the best job of keeping it secret. And there's a no magic policy as well. She's like, "Oh, the previous owner told me I should have this thing in place because apparently if you cast magic, bad things can happen. Cantrips are okay, please don't cast any magic in my inn, otherwise I'll kick you out." There was a quest board on the wall there. That's where they learned about all the quests and bounties, which I updated a couple of times to kind of keep it feeling quite alive and active. And the quest there was, if you sort out my rat problem, I will give you free bed and board and a magic staff. And in the back of the inn, they saw a doppel rat, which they killed really quickly and easily. I think it rolled really low on the initiative. But it's basically from Tome of Beasts, and it can basically duplicate itself into swarms of rats and then hide itself in swarms of rats. So if it had gotten a chance to have a turn, it probably would have done a lot more. Would have been a bit more of a notable battle, I think. One of their NPC allies, including Ilvi, the Loxodon, who's actually Vilnius, is Jennifer Weathermay Foxgrove. And she is a druid, and I have it that she goes to different druid circles, she can learn more wild shapes. And they asked about druid circles, and they were told about one in the Last Wood. I think I got this idea from old Mrpedia lore. I got a feeling that Arrow the Raven brought attention to this, so thank you to Arrow the Raven. In one of his videos, he talks about a druid circles being messed around with magic. So they go to the Last Wood, Jennifer attunes to it, and then she can't control as she becomes different elementals, air, fire, water, and earth, one at a time. And instead of having to fight her, they managed to use persuasion and stuff like that to talk her down, which I thought was a nice approach rather than just that classic, we keep hitting you until you stop misbehaving. I can't remember what else they did. I think I might cast some magic to calm her down as well. And then the result of it is that in addition to wild shaping into beasts, she can now wild shape into different elementals, which are more powerful. But the risk is it's like the Hazlan wild magic effect. If she wild shapes, she has to roll a d10. I think I did a d4 actually, just to make it even more sort of punishing. And if she were to roll, say, a 1 on the d4, it'd be a d3. And then a 1 on the d3 would make it d2, and things like that. So the more she uses it and gets surges, the more likely a surge will happen until, if she becomes it, there's always a surge. And this would be something that carries on outside of Hazlan as well. So even if you go to other places in the future, this kind of carries over and still happens. So they return and they meet the two troublesome mages who are gambling. One of them accuses them of cheating. This is the Githyanki Gish and the great old one warlock I talked about earlier. And this was fun because in the middle of the tavern they're casting loads of different spells. Didn't get a single d10 roll, sadly. I just thought it'd be weird if there was like a random fireball going off in the middle of the tavern. Could have been quite interesting. Basically the PC rolled like, I think, a natural 20 on intimidation. They were like, fine, we'll leave. And one of them casts Dimension Door, another one casts like, I can't remember what the spell is, but like created a portal. So even their attempts to leave could have triggered the d10 roll, but didn't. They learn more about the domain as a whole. They learn more about the Fleshless Forest, the lacuna, the magical marks dotted around the domain. And that night was a new moon. I said that during the night, meteors, they could hear the sound of meteors crashing into an area of the map northeast, and that is the Moonstone Valley. As it says in the book, that more meteors arrive, I think, at every new moon. And so that was what happened. They went to Ramulai next. I think this was to do some of the quests were in only Ramulai. They found 2 Grimishkas next to a dead body. This is one of the random encounters. And it was an Eye of Hazlik on the dead body, and there was a swarm of maggots, and they defeated that. And the Eye of Hazlik the wizard took, so the wizard could cast spells more freely with less risk of the d10 Wild Surge. They crossed the bridge, and the rider, the headless rider from the Rider's Bridge appeared. I talk all about this in my Rider's Bridge video, where if they cross the bridge in any domain, the headless rider might appear, and this was the time they defeated it for good as well. Like I said, talk about that more in that video. They get to Ramulai, and they go to the mine, and they meet 2 interesting NPCs. They see a very flustered grey-skinned gnome chatting to a monk-type, cleric-type person. And the cleric monk was Brother Dominic, who, if you know the novel Tapestry of Dark Souls, he's in that. And he's also in Order Ravenloft Law. He's one of the Orders of the Guardians. That's one of the sort of Ravenloft factions. And his Mr. info said he can be found in Hazlan, so I thought I'd throw him in Hazlan as well. The miner, the grey-skinned gnome, is freaking out. He's talking to Brother Dominic, saying that there's monsters in the mine. He's got miners trapped in there. So I called him. This is where I got a bit silly. His name was Michael Mickle Herbaltrout. Michael Mickle, for short, was just Mike. And I did this because the Deep Gnome artwork, at the time I was rewatching Breaking Bad for the second, maybe third time, and the artwork for a Deep Gnome really reminded me of one of the main characters from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. And so I kind of role-played him accordingly and did the voice as well. I don't think any more players watched Breaking Bad, so they were just like, okay. So he was, let's see if I can do the voice. He was like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. I got some guys in there, we need to rescue them. Some idiot mage, no offense, talking to the wizard, no offense, but some idiot mage came along, said she could summon some monsters that would help with our mining, and I said yes, and it turned out they were Zon. Zon are creatures that eat precious minerals. So now instead of monsters helping with the mining, they're eating all the minerals in the mine. To make matters worse, I got some people in there, hiding in the chapel, who need rescuing. I'm not a fighter, I'm gonna let you lead the way, but I'm going to go in with you and we're going to rescue my people and deal with these monsters. So I kind of gave him that voice. That was probably a terrible impression. My major apologies to Jonathan Banks, the actor who played him. And Brother Dominic, I forgot to mention as well, joins them doing this, and I used the War Priest stat block. I think that's Volo's Guide to Monsters. Much more powerful than Priest. At this point, with my players being level 16, makes sense for an NPC who can potentially heal them to be a War Priest and not a Priest. But if you were playing it for a low-level party, you might want to just make him more of a regular priest from the monster manual. And there is a resource called Champions of the Mist that talks about Brother Dominic, and it has spell suggestions for him as well. So I adapted this for 5th edition and adapted his spell list to be spells that mirrored that. So that was quite fun to do. So the first monsters they encountered were animated pickaxes, which were reflavoured flying swords. So these were actual pickaxes that they used, but the summoning of the Zons made these who kind of corrupted these and they become evil and were like trying to attack people. And then later on they found Zorn, who were trying to eat all of the different parts of the mine. Oh, I should mention as well, the map. I really struggled to find a good map. I only found one where it wasn't just a standard mine, it was a mine with really different colourful crystals. So I thought this was perfect, so I'll include a link for this in the description. And on the map, it shows in the top a pile of money. And I just thought this could be a Horde Mimic or a Horde Golem. And essentially when Mike sees it, he's like, hey, that's new, that's nothing to do with us. And in addition to freeing the miners, defeating the Zorn, they had to deal with this Horde Mimic as well, or just figure out what was good. What is the deal with this random pile of money? Oh, it's a monster, should have guessed. They rescued the miners, got them out, dealt with the Zorn, dealt with the Horde Mimic, and Yort was offered a job as security for the mine. The way it played out was Mike said, I'd love to have some sort of security, scare mages away from coming into the mine and trying to be helpful and, you know, backfiring. And they were like, oh, we got a guy who's hoping for a job. And he was like, oh, cool, it sounds like he can help with not just protecting the mine, but maybe he can like move stuff around. He's a giant construct. So Yort was given a purpose that didn't have to destroy people, hooray. And so they introduced Yort to Mike. And that was another thing I got from Breaking Bad as well. He'd refer to Yort, even though Yort is this huge, scary looking construct, he'd call him Kid, which if you know Breaking Bad, Mike refers to Jesse, one of the main characters, as Kid. He's like, the kid's doing well. We've had no issues with mages since then. Those idiot mages, no offense. Mike also explained he heard that there was a dragon nearby. And so Mike gave them the quest to find a copper dragon, and I got this information from Misterpedia. I think this is from like a fanon resource, where there is a dragon called Grezanletyr. I'll talk more about that in a minute when they go to tackle them. Dom explains who he is. He's from the Order of the Guardians, and he's looking for something called the Iron Flask, or Iron Flask of Eleni the Merciless, I think is what it says in the Old Lore. This is borrowed from Old Ravenloft Domain. He had a friend missing who was supposed to meet him in Ramulai, and he was travelling from Toyalis to Ramulai. His theory is something happened to him in the Fleshless Forest. And Dom says he'll travel with them and help them if he helps them with this quest, which they say yes to. It's at this point they think about Firan, and my player has a magic item that allows them to scry. And so they scry on Firan, and it's successful. And they see Firan in this sort of campsite with a bunch of different apprentices. And they hear about how he's the new guy, Firan's the new guy, and Firan's kind of disguised himself so that he's made him out as if to be like a weaker apprentice rather than like this powerful wizard. And they hear about like all different things about Hazlan and Hazlik, and what's Hazlik like? Oh yeah, he gives us lectures sometimes. And I can't quite remember what else, but it was a bit of a lore drop, a bit of information, and they were currently waiting to be given orders. They were just bored in this campsite essentially, which comes clearer later on. So that was quite fun. So they knew Firan was somewhere in the domain, but they couldn't, based on this campsite, figure out where. But they knew he was around, and they knew he was safe and doing okay, and had for some reason become an apprentice of Hazlik's. Next, they went to the Fallen Sisters, which is where I put Grezanletyr's lair. And I used the Tom Kartos map. He's got like a sort of copper dragon lair map. And I used a empty variant, and I tinted it blue as well to match the sort of mountains by there. And when they meet Grez, he is in a bad state. I think I got this from the Misterpedia info. He came to Hazlan, tried to challenge Hazlik, and Hazlik defeated him. And then he's hiding out here, and he hasn't eaten for a while, so he's quite skinny and he's quite wheezy. His deal, if you look up his information, is quite interesting. So he used to attack people and try and steal treasure for them, and then he was cursed by a fellow dragon. I think he killed his like partner, spouse dragon. He was cursed to have to eat. Oh, it was a Vistani curse. He was cursed to have to eat his own treasure to survive. So he needs to eat treasure to survive, and he basically says to the players, please, if you give me 1,000 gold, I will be able to leave Hazlan, and as a thank you as well, I'll give you a dragon's blessing. I'll give you, basically I did this as like the resilient feat as a thank you. My players have quite a lot of money and don't really spend much, so they gave him, so semi-reluctantly gave him 1,000 gold, and they decided to rest nearby as they heard this dragon crunching, trying to eat coins, while they're thinking, oh, that's gross. They had a long rest. The next morning he gives them the blessings. I let them choose which, skill it applied to. But he then flew through the roof. He's got like weak spots in the roof. I think we got that from the information that Tom Carter's provided with the map. But as they go outside, they hear him fly back and say, but you've got more treasure, haven't you? Maybe I could eat you and all your treasure too. And they have a fight. And he's flying in the air, and I thought, oh, this will be great because, it's going to be holiday, and he does various attacks on them, and I think he killed at least one NPC. But one of my players used the Lupus Talker of Souls ability, which they've got access to. It's got a thing where you can make people have disadvantage for an hour, but there's a side effect that a monster can escape. And this is what happened. They used it on Grez, and a ghost escaped somewhere in the domain, which I'll talk about in a minute. I tried to play Grez smart. When he realised he's going to lose, he tried to retreat, and just as he was about to get out of range, the rogue with a well-aimed arrow took Grez down and killed him. He took, I think, a tooth or a claw as proof to give to Mike later on. I also had it that the dragon blessings remained as well. I think it would have been cruel to have, had that and then the blessing immediately faded. So the blessings were permanent even with Grez's defeat. As they were trying to move then through the mountains, I think they were heading back to Toyalis, they encountered 2 Chelicerae. These are like magical spiders I talk about. It's quite a tough encounter. They had their first wild magic surge thanks to Brother Dominic casting a spell, and a random portal appeared. And at the end of the battle as well, I played Ilvi as getting quite upset, and I role-played him so close to Vilnius. He was like throwing a tantrum, basically being like, I hate this place, I hate it. Just like one of Vilnius's tantrums in the Amber Temple. And my players, if they suspect anything, haven't said anything. I don't know if they suspect that he's Vilnius or not, but that was probably the closest, most obvious clue to Ilvi being Vilnius that I did. And if they know or suspect anything, they didn't say anything. They got back to Toyalis, to the inn, and they encountered an orc woman who says that her husband is missing, please help. And my PC with Scrying scried, managed to detect him, and could see he was walking in the middle of just random barren Hazlan, but could sense the sun in the position of the sky and position of like landmarks. They could tell he was somewhere between Toyalis and the Lacuna, and he looked like he was walking towards the Lacuna. So they managed to catch up to him. They realised he's been possessed by a ghost, and they managed to stop the possession, defeat the ghost, and then that stops the issue with that's basically the monster that escaped from Lupus Talker of Souls. They have a long rest, and next they go to the Fleshless forest. I used the Mad Cartographer map for it. In the map, it shows like a petrified horse, cart, and people around it. And what I had is that Dominic recognised one of them as one of his fellow Order of the Guardians members, but they're actually stone cursed. So they need to be defeated first, but they've got to be careful not to smash them, because I had it that if they smashed them and then fixed them with Greater Restoration, they would be smashed people. So they defeat them very carefully. Brother Dominic casts Greater Restoration on the main one, and he explains that the forest petrified them, and that the info they're looking for, they think the Iron Flask is in the Orbitoclasts, one of the other areas in Hazlan. So that's their next, or a later place they can go to. That member of the Order of the Guardians, I think I said it was Brother Petto, who's one of the characters from Tapestry of Dark Souls. He said he was going to try and find someone to cast Greater Restoration on these other people who are petrified, in the horse and the cart, and don't worry, I'll sort this out. So that, Brother Dominic didn't have to go back there like 5 times. They go to Ramulai, get the bounty reward for defeating the dragon, and then they go to the Brew. This was another bounty. At the Brew, there were some Deathcap Myconids from Tome of Beasts, and then they were told they were looking for a Valachera, but I actually had 2 of them, just to make it harder. And then the bounty giver was like, oops, there were 2, I thought there was only 1, really sorry. These are from Flea Mortals, and they were quite fun to run, and they were quite a tough battle. I think that's why we got our Wild Search, where someone cast Fireball on themselves as well, just to make things a little bit harder. From there, they went to the Orbitoclasts. I used the map, same with the Brew, same with some of the other locations, I used Mad Cartographer maps. And I had it that if they prioritised this and went there sooner, because they did the dragon before they did the Fleshless Forest, but if they did this sooner, they would have bumped into Ruzello there, who was in the middle of getting the Iron Flask. But because they didn't, there was a note there, or a mark left by Ruzello that suggested that he'd been there and he'd taken the Iron Flask. So they knew that they kind of missed it. And on the map of the Orbitoclasts, there's a lake underneath. Now, previously I said there were no lakes or anything in Hazlan, same with because of the Sand Sea isn't a proper sea. So, and it turns out this is the Oasis. When they travelled up to the Orbitoclasts, because they're floating in the sky, and then travelled back down, the Oasis attempted to attack them, and when they saw the size of it, they were like, nope. Even though I reckon we could have defeated it fairly easily, they didn't know how strong it was. They retreated. But they were able to let Person know, oh, your missing Petus has ended up in, this is one of the quest ideas, someone's missing Petus, it's probably this lake just below the Orbitoclasts. I got this idea for Final Fantasy XII as well, where I think there's somebody who has a bounty where they had like a pet tortoise that grew into a monster. They went back to Toyalis, got various bounty rewards, and then they had a letter addressed to the Wizard PC. It's from Hazlik, and it's a magic mouth spell, and I've got it here in front of me. Wizard Bob and companions. Invitation to Veneficus at earliest convenience to discuss mutually beneficial arrangement. Forgive brevity, word limit. Regards, Hazlik, rule of Hazlan. And this was Hazlan inviting them to Veneficus to have a meeting. Very similar to Strahd inviting the PCs to Castle Ravenloft in Barovia. There was also an attack on the inn. So what happened? Oh yeah, the scout who was a were-raven, they asked her to send a message to some people outside of Hazlan. So she went, came back, and on her way back, she was like, I was chased by 2 things, but I think I lost them. And then these 2 orbs smashed through the window, and she goes, nope, I didn't lose them, there they are. And these are 2 Quicksilver Siege orbs, so they attacked the inn, and my players had to quickly defeat those. It's great using the map multiple times for different kind of encounters and battles that way. The next day, they windwalked to Veneficus. I'll cover Veneficus in more detail in my part 2 video. But I had it, there was a meeting room on the 4th floor of 25 floors, and what the Armad cartographer folks did is that they had a blank room, essentially, so you could populate it yourself. And I had this as the meeting room, and Hazlik's justification was a room free of distraction, no seats. It's a bit like if any of you folks work in like software development. I used to work for a software company years ago. My main job is marketing, but I worked at a software company. And if you're familiar with like agile stand-ups, you have like daily meetings. They're called stand-ups because you have a standing meeting, because if you sit down, you get too comfortable. It's like a quick thing, like have a quick recap. What are we doing today? What's going on? What did you do yesterday? What are you working on, kind of thing. And it's that kind of mentality where it's just this empty room, you grab a quick chat, and then you get on with your day. They meet him and his entourage, and there's initial chatter of homeworld because he's from Thay in Toril, I think the world is called, and Firan is the continent, where 2 of my 3 players are from. So 2 of the 3 players were already familiar with Thay and the reputation that Red Wizards had as well. They were like, how did you know about us? You know, you sent us a letter. And he's like, I have eyes everywhere. And this is obviously a nod to the eyes of Hazlik. He asked them, where's your Loxodon friend? Ilvi said he was too scared to go to the meeting because he's scared of Hazlik. Where's your Loxodon friend? And they were like, that's odd, he's an apprentice of yours, isn't he? And they were like, no, I don't think I've ever met a Loxodon. They're the elephant people, right? And this is a clue that Ilvi/Vilnius isn't who he says he is. He compliments the Wizard PC staff of the Magi. There's a bit of flirting and innuendo. He's like, I like your staff. It says a lot about a wizard, how they handle their staff, etc. He knows they're looking for someone, Firan, and he will help them if they do a quest for him. If they go to an old temple in the Mound of the Worm area, they got to destroy an old golem of his he's worried will break free and wreak havoc. The problem is he can't do it himself because there's an anti-magic field there. You know, he's a very strong individual, but you know, he sees that there's a paladin and a rogue and other NPCs here. I'm sure you'll be fine. I'm sure you can manage it amongst yourselves. And also, his apprentice Rosello recently gave him an iron flask that he knows that Brother Dominic is looking for. Another quest is, I think one of my main 3 apprentices is a traitor. I don't think it's Eleni. She's very faithful and she's my favourite. Maybe Jarl the Skygazer. Maybe Rosello, although I doubt it's Rosello because Rosello just got me the iron flask. Surely if he was a traitor he wouldn't give me the iron flask, he would have kept it for himself and used it himself, but maybe he's playing the long game, blah blah blah. I did all this so that he ruminates and talks about all this, and just to show his paranoia and his silliness. The truth is none of them are traitors, but he thinks at least one of them is a traitor, and it could have been an opportunity to meet them. He told them that Jarl is in charge of Moonstone Valley, Eleni's working on a project on the Mound of the Worm, Rosello's somewhere. So there could have been an opportunity for them to meet them. But they prioritised the golem in the anti-magic field place first, and that's kind of a trigger for the endgame, as I'll talk about soon. There's the servant snafu. Mostly the conversation was between the wizard PC and Hazlik. And I think at one point the wizard turns around and says, does anyone else have any questions? And he's like, oh, you allow your servants to speak? And the paladin and the rogue were like, oh, hold on a second, what? We're not his servants. We're all equals. And he's like, oh, forgive me. This is a majorocracy. Wizards like me and your friend here are at the top. Strong individuals such as you, paladin, rogue, are probably next. And then, non-magical people are right down the bottom. It's just the way it is. He also tells the story of Veneficus. This is the information in Van Richten's guide, where him and a rival, Red Wizard of Thay, fell in love, but he thinks that Veneficus betrayed him, and he turns him into a human living portal, even though it's an agonizing thing. And I did this thing as well, where when he was showing it to his Wizards of Thay, he was like, I thought they were considering me a genius, but they thought I was just pure evil. Even Saz-Tam tutted me. And I thought that was funny. Saz-Tam is like the leader of the Red Wizard of Thay, who's like a lich and is super evil. And this is the depths of depravity that even Saz-Tam wouldn't, consider. And tutting just felt very sort of polite way of saying, oh, he shook his head at me. And then it's the whole thing in the book where it says he leaves through the portal and he ends up in Hazlan. And that was it. He was like, I'll leave you now. Oh, when he was explaining the story of, the reason he told them the story of Veneficus is he gets really intense halfway through saying that, you know, I told you this story because if people are good to me, I will be good to you. But if people ever betray me, I will do the worst things imaginable to you. Right, there we are then. Off you go. It's sort of like that really sort of changeable personality where he's like telling the story, then he's like basically threatening them. You ever betray me and I will destroy you. And then a second later acting like, you know, we're best friends, it's all good. They leave, they go to Sly-Var for the first time. They find the Sand Sea. It's eerily quiet. Lots of eyes of Hazlik everywhere, like drawn graffiti style onto buildings. Included a magic shop, TARDIS style, where it looked tiny, but when they go in, it's huge, where someone's selling like magical potions and some equipment and stuff. And they go to the inn. There's an Edimu battle on the way. These are like the sand creatures flying out of the Sand Sea. They learn some information from the innkeepers about the town, where various places are, so because they were looking for at least like 2 or 3 quest givers somewhere in Sly-Var. So they go to the Tattoo Church, which is one of the places on the map I used, and there's information in Old Lore about it. And this person can give regular tattoos, magical tattoos as per Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. They also knew a magical tattoo giver from, I put one in Litwood Market in the carnival. And he's the one who gives the Sand Sea quest. Please fix the Sand Sea. But as they're about to discuss how to tackle the Sand Sea, and they stumble on an idea, which I'll talk about later, a dwarf comes in holding a big book and then collapses. And this is the trigger for the Kandlekeep Mysteries adventure, Kandlekeep Dekonstruktion. So Kandlekeep Mysteries, the Kandlekeep Dekonstruktion adventure. It's a very entertaining and interesting idea where somebody is trying to launch a rocket into space. With a little bit of tweaking, not a huge amount of tweaking, I was able to make it fit Hazlan and Hazlan's lore and things like that. So instead of setting it in Kandlekeep, which was supposed to be, the rocket tower is in Sly-Var. And I had it that there's 2 inns, or there were 2 inns in Sly-Var. One of them closed, and the one that's closed, which is right by the Tattoo Church, has a round part next to a rectangular part, and the round part is the actual tower bit. So when this dwarf comes in and collapses and dies, and they see the schematics for a tower, I think it says in the book, the person who runs the Tattoo Church says, oh, I think I've seen his kind and the way they're dressed, they're doing some work on the old inn, just, you know, over the road. That's how they knew where to go. Even though it's a higher level adventure, some of the NPCs are quite weak. So there are cultists as some of the NPCs. To make this more interesting and more setting appropriate, I changed them to apprentice mages. They're from Folo's Guide to Monsters, Monsters of the Multiverse, and gave them some animated brooms as well. They're in Curse of Strahd. I don't think they're in anything else, but obviously we all know the animated broom of attack in Curse of Strahd. So when it talks in the information that they're sweeping, the brooms are actually minions as well. I kept most of the rest as it is straight out of the book. Stonky I changed to be Hazlik's librarian. So Stonky worked for Hazlik. One of the floors of the tower is a library. He didn't like how Hazlik treated the books, and so he's decided to take important books, put them in this tower / rocket, and try and launch the rocket into space. A bunch of the livestock, which is the name of the cult, are quite aggressive and attack people on sight. All of them got defeated, but there's 4 who are already tied themselves up ready for the rocket to launch, and they don't do anything, and my PCs left them alone. So in the end, Stonky survived, and those 4 members of the livestock survived. And instead of killing Stonky when you have the encounter with Stonky, they knocked him out because they were like, what the heck is going on here? And these 4 people who have tied themselves up aren't, you know, willing to talk. And that's where you get the lore from this adventure where he's trying to launch these books into space because he loves his books. I thought because it's Hazlan, his logic is, oh, the borders are closed. You can't go north, south, east, west, but you can go up. But obviously it's Ravenloft in the mists. I had the idea that if the rocket did launch, it would then plummet and then crash somewhere in Hazlan, like a D100 roll to determine where. But they managed to convince him to stop the launch because they gave him an alternative idea. They said, we're going to deal with Hazlik. We'll give you a bag of holding, put all the books in a bag of holding, and we'll escort you to the border, and you can leave. And he was like, okay, I'll do that instead. They managed to convince him. They pretty much had, you know, a sword at his throat, and they were like, your rocket's going to crash. This isn't going to work. It'll disappear in the mists and you'll die. And so he was like, oh, fine then, as much as you wanted to launch the rocket. After that, they went back to the Tattooed Church, discussed options, and they kind of surmised that only a powerful magic item tied to water or some sort of water deity or something like that could tackle the Sansi issue. Now, long story short, I don't think I even talked about this in my Full Kovnia video, but when they went to Full Kovnia, there was a water genasi who was one of Bjorn Horseman's experiments in a coma, and I needed a way to like wake her up, and so I said that there was a genie's lamp at the bottom of a lake, or Bjorn had heard that it was a magical item. They retrieved it, and it turned out a Mareed, a water genie, was inside it. And as thank you for releasing them, he said that he would wake up their water genasi friend. And a beautiful thing about this as well is this is discovered after Vladesk was defeated and the zombie siege problem was sorted out. Otherwise, that would have been having a water genie. They could have found it before. The seed of the hook was there before, I think, for that quest. And then they could have had a Mareed, a water genie, helping out in the battle against zombies. That would have been pretty cool. But they found it afterwards, and basically he said, right, I'm going to leave now. And he left. They have access to a necklace of prayer beads, and they have access to the spell Planar Ally. That's how they've summoned Deva a couple of times in the past. This time they decided to summon the Mareed, and the Mareed appeared and said, I remember you guys, you freed me in Full Kovnia. I owe you a favour. Well, other than the water genasi, they're like, if I help you one more favour, we'll call it the debt paid. And so the water Mareed goes to the Sansi, says, I sense an elemental locus in the water. This thing hits hard, make sure you're prepared before we fight it. So they have a short rest. They were careful about what spells they cast in preparation. The Mareed does something that draws out the elemental locus, and if you look at the stat block, it's in Tome Beasts, you can summon elementals as well. So it summons some earth elementals and some mud mephits, and they managed to defeat it. And the water, or the sand sea, the water in Sly-Var changed from yellowy, murky, sandy water to classic, regular blue water. So that was another quest done. But when the Mareed tries to leave, the Mareed says, because I think it's got like plane shift or something, it goes, I can't leave. The borders of this place are closed. This is Domains of Dread, right? That can happen sometimes. And the players are like, uh-oh, we know what this means. Hazlik's closed the borders. Why has Hazlik closed the borders? Is it because he wants us to do these 2 quests for him and he doesn't want us to leave in the meantime? What it actually is because he doesn't want the wizard PC to leave with the staff. He wants that staff. So he decides to stay in the water to just be like, I'll keep an eye, make sure the elemental locust doesn't come back, or some city mage doesn't do city magic to make the water go silly again. And they realise they've got to tell Stonky, right, our plan of going out across the borders on hold for now. Maybe go somewhere like Toyalis and just hang out there for now. And so him and the remaining livestock with a bag of holding full of books go to the inn in Toyalis. It's then that they decide that they're going to tackle the temple and the Mound of the Worm. Now this is one of the quests given by Hazlik, the anti-magic field. I think it was a Chepeku map for the outside of the temple, and I think it's a 2-minute tabletop. If I've got it wrong, some text will probably appear here and correct me. For the inside of the thing. And what I said was that the initial cavern area, so the wizard cast the light cantrip, and as he walked in, it dismissed. The lights went out. And so it's just that initial cavern area where the anti-magic field is. When they walked into the main sanctum, and they could use magic, but maybe they just didn't sense that magic was available. The golem rises from the coffin, and they hear Hazlik's voice through it saying, ha ha ha, you fools! This was a trap! I'm going to see this golem kill you, and then I'll get your staff wizard PC. Great, I can even watch it through the eyes. Where's my bucket of popcorn? Or something like that. Now, it's a really underwhelming battle, because this eye golem can do loads of really cool stuff, but one of my PCs, the paladin, has a Vorpal sword. Got a natural 20 on the first attack. Boom. There's a headless eye golem. And then Hazlik was like, oh, even though the thing's killed, Hazlik can still speak through it. And he's like, oh, that was underwhelming. Well, I best lock the tower down. I'll see you soon. And as he says, see you soon, it's like when electronic appliances go wrong and he goes, I'll see you. Like that. So yes, and then they realise they can cast magic and magic items work in the sanctum area. And when they go outside, they hear some voices. And they realise it's one of the apprentices. Now, when they scryed on Firan, I had one of the apprentices who sort of act as the leader, and he was very, very talkative, and I could hear his voice. And obviously one of the PCs, the one who did the scrying, recognised it, and I also saw a raven flying. There was like a sort of hill in the way, so they couldn't quite see them straight away. But they could see a raven, they knew Firan had a raven, they're like, oh, okay, it's these guys. And then they approached and were like, Hazlik finally gave us a quest and told us to retrieve the staff from the dead people, but you survived. Okay, well, Zal, and that's Firan's, because he's Firan's zal'honan, Firan gave the name Zal while he's in disguise. Zal, you're the new guy and you said you have some really powerful spell. Why don't you give us a demonstration? And I think I talked about this in probably the Firan video. Firan walks up, pulls down his hood, and he's like, yeah, I'll give a demonstration. But instead of casting Power Word Kill on one of the PCs, he casts it on this other mage, which evens the odds as well, because there are about 5 or 6 different mages, and there were like 3 PCs, a couple of NPCs. And Firan says, I'm going to go hang out with you guys. Remember me from the Ember Temple in Barovia? Hello. It's me, Firan. I'm switching sides. And then there was this really chaotic, beautiful, brilliant mage battle with a lot of stat blocks, a lot of spell slots, and I had to keep track of people casting. Anytime anyone cast a spell, it was a D10 roll, although a bunch of them had Eyes of Hazlik. And some of them were casting Counterspell, as well as the PCs, as well as Firan. Some of them were casting Shield. It was chaos. It was great. Amazing, we didn't have a single D10 roll. We had a couple of people use their Eyes of Hazlik, but no like D10 roll Magic Surge. And there must have been like 20 or 30 spells cast. It was chaotic. It was a lot of fun though. One of my players said it was like one of the most fun and interesting battles they'd seen in D&D, so that was great. What actually happened is they only defeated 1 mage and 2, and it was actually the mage, so one of the mages tried to calm everyone down, tried to heal people, cast Revivify on the one who had Power Word killed, and he then carried on attacking and was killed again. And in the end, only 1 mage and a familiar and a shadow demon that was summoned by the drow mage were killed. Everyone else retreated, so they managed to like scare everyone off. And then they caught up with Firan and confirmed. Firan was like, oh gosh, I guess Madam Eva's annoyed at me. Yes, I came here because I wanted to compare notes with Hazlik. I wondered if the curse he has is the same as mine. I didn't think knocking on the front door and introducing myself would be a good idea, so I thought I'd climb the ladder from the bottom and become an apprentice. But then we were given this really boring mission where we were just on lookout and essentially sent to this camp, given no orders for like a week or 2. And then I bump into you guys, hey. He realises, well, I can hang out with you guys and maybe together we can defeat Hazlik. Long rest in the sanctum, there's no trouble. They go back to Toyalis. They discover that Ilvi is missing. That's why they left Ilvi. And they find out that he asked the barkeep for some more rations. Said he was going outside for some air, and then he never came back. And then they found out from a random person in Toyalis that they saw an elephant person disappear in a wisp, and it was Windwalk, because my player had cast it on them himself, the other NPCs including Ilvi. So Ilvi left to go somewhere. And he casts Scrying on him, and he's in a dark room. And he's basically saying to himself, this is boring, I've just got to wait this out, just need them to kill Hazlik. That's all I need to do, just need them to kill Hazlik. And he's basically hiding and waiting for them to kill Hazlik, and then he's going to then take over the tower. He's actually on like, I think the 3rd floor has like a windowless room, which is pitch black. So they might see him on the way up, and you know, at that point they might find out who he really is. I'll mention that in part 2 if I remember. They also meet another quest giver. This is someone at Sly-Var who wasn't in, so they left a note. She's a former apprentice of Hazlik's who'd cast some magic near Eleni Mark, and her spells had come to life. This is the living spells I talked about earlier. So I thought they were going to be like, right, we'll do that later, let's do Hazlik first. But they decided to help her out first, because her rewards were a few scores of mass cure wounds. They cast Windwalk this time because they cast Teleport from the Sanctum to Toyalis, so they had Windwalk available. You can cast once a day. Cast Windwalk on all of them, including the quest giver. Go to Eleni's Mark and have this fight with these really cool monsters that, you know, the living Burning Hands can do Burning Hands every now and again. But, you know, one of them cast Globe of Invulnerability and, like, nothing was really hitting them. But, so they defeated them quite easily, and then were given 2 scrolls of Mass Cure Wounds. At that point, they head to Veneficus while the other person goes back to Toyalis, and they arrive outside the tower, and they're deciding what to do. I described the tower as well, the outside, so I used glasswork golems for the 2 guards outside. I want to say these are from the Witchlight book. When they arrived, there was no sign of them, but the door is essentially the stained glass window. I described it as looking like Hazlik casting a devastating spell on a wizard, a paladin, and a rogue. It's meant to be the 3 PCs, and Fran's like, hey, that looks like you guys. And the idea is when they go close to it, it shifts and it turns into 2 glasswork golems and they attack. So they are there, they're just not visible because they are collectively making this stained glass window. So they decide, should we go in through the top, fly to the top and go down, or should we just make our way up from the bottom? And Firan says he heard from the apprentices that the tower's got some strong defences. If you touch it, it's sheathed in lightning. I stole this idea from Curse of Strahd with Van Richten's tower. My players never triggered that, so I thought I could reuse it. And Animated Breath, which are from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. If they were to, say, fly up or float up, there would be loads of those would appear. And it's trying to deter them. Plus, I put the floor near the top that Hazlik's on, that I thought, you know, if they work their way down, at least this kind of knocks, you know, uses up some of their resources so they're not going to Hazlik on full power. So they were like, we should probably go in through the front door. And then one of my players caught me by surprise, and I should have seen this coming. They cast Locate Creature and cast it on Hazlik. I was like, I'd already assigned what magic items Hazlik had, and I guess he could have he had a scroll of Mind Blank, but I just didn't think. And I said, yeah, you detect him near the top. And they're like, well, he is near the top, but we'll work our way through the bottom if it's safer. And they'd already seen the bottom 4 floors and could see they're pretty much empty. So that's like almost 1/5 of the tower. They knew would be hassle-free anyway. And they're about to go in and they cast different spells to get ready. They ask their rogue, who's got a couple of spells, to cast Pass Without Trace, and it triggers a D10 roll. That causes the wizard to become poisoned, because it's like some sort of random effect where someone nearby becomes poisoned for an hour. And then he casts Lesser Restoration on himself, and he gets the D10 roll. He gets a 1. And we ended up with the thing that's described in Van Richten's Guide in the Hazlan Wild Magic table is like many limbs, skinless, shrieking, unicorn type thing is about to attack them. So we haven't even gotten in the tower yet and they've already had an encounter. That is literally where we ended last session. They will fight that, and then they'll probably fight the 2 Glasswork Golems and work their way up the tower. And then in the next video, I'll tell you everything I did on the 25 floors of the tower, which maps I used in the Endless Wizard tower packs, both of them, what monsters I put and what NPCs, what treasure and magic items. Yeah, it'd be fun. Before I wrap up this video, I want to talk about some stuff that didn't get used. So I had a whole thing where Yort, that was the nickname they gave the Hellfire engine, who now works at Ramulai Mine. His 2 creators come, and it was actually going to be the orc man and woman who they saved from the ghost encounter I mentioned ages ago. The next time they'd go to Ramulai, Mike, the miner, grabs them and pulls them aside, and they can hear the Hellfire engine crying, and he's like, there was an incident, can I do the voice again? There was an incident with a kid. 2 idiot mages, no offense. They came, said something about how they created him, they wanted him to come back, he said no. Oh, I forgot to mention as well, the 2 Grimishkas they found by the dead body of the Eye of Hazlik ended up just joining them, and they became like 2 pets of Yort. And what happens is the orcs go to cast some spells on Yort, and it triggers the Grimishkas to react. Grimishkas, if you read about them in Van Richten's Guide, can react weirdly if magic is cast, and one of them can like turn into a swarm of Grimishkas, and very dangerous. And so Yort had to use his ability to like kill these Grimishkas, like one of his cannon. I think Hellfire engines have like 3 different kinds of attacks. Had to use one of his attacks to kill these Grimishkas before they hurt people. And so Mike's saying, you know, Yort feels awful, he had to kill something. It was one of his 2 pets, even though nothing could be done about it and it wasn't his fault, he blames himself, blah, blah, blah. So I had that for if they ever went back to Ramulai, but that hasn't happened yet. I also have done very little with the 3 apprentices, other than prepping them and talking about, you know, Hazlik given the quest to which one is the traitor. I might add Rosello to the tower, and he attacks them in the tower. Jarl the Skygazer I might save as a potential replacement for Hazlik. When Hazlik is killed, he becomes a new Darklord. And Eleni, I think, is going to get revenge on them. I think one time they visit the carnival, Gravedrinker, the white purple worm, will attack them. So I've got some plans for that. And they also didn't do all of the bounties and quests. They did most of them, but there was one in Seething. There was a Smaragdine Golem I added to one of the woodland areas, I can't remember what it's called. And I was going to have a random person in Sly-Var has a pet Angry Sorrowsworn. So the Sorrowsworn are like mist monsters or monsters from the Shadowfell. They previously fought and met the lost, hungry, wretched and lonely variants, and the angry is the strongest. And this idiot mage is like, I've caught an Angry Sorrowsworn, it's my pet. And this Angry Sorrowsworn kills them and is running around loose, killing people in Sly-Var, so they got to defeat it. That didn't happen. And I also didn't do anything with the purple worms. However, going to have, as I mentioned a minute ago, Gravedrinker and Eleni attack the carnival, and that's the purple worm, so we'll probably do that then. And future plans, well, we'll see how things go with part 2 video. I think I'll talk about that at the end of the part 2 video, depending on how things go. But yeah, it all depends on how things play out. Obviously, Hazlik will be killed, and then the borders will reopen. Will Ilvi be the replacement Darklord? Will Jarl the Skygazer? Will somebody else? Will there be no Darklord? I don't know why I sound like Chandler and Friends. Will there be no Darklord? I guess we'll wait and see. I'll talk about that at the end of the next video if I remember. And that's it for this one. Another epic, stupidly long video. I'm sorry, or you're welcome, depending on your feelings of whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. If you are running Hazlan, I really hope it helps. Like I said, I think things like Tome of Beasts, the monster suggestions are amazing. The monster ideas are there. And knowing that Mad Cartographer's done maps for different places in Hazlan, and the Wizard Tower maps, I just thought that was ideal. So if that's helped you out, and you didn't know about those and now you know about them, then double thumbs up from me, or 3 because of my t-shirt. This is a t-shirt, Los Campesinos. who are even though they've got a Spanish name, they are a Cardiff-based band where I live, and they're great. Upcoming videos, so there will be Hazlan Part 2 coming soon. I wouldn't say the well's running dry on the Ravenloft front, I just don't know what to do next. A long time ago I teased about doing factions of Ravenloft. I haven't done that because I just don't think I'd do the best job of it, so that's why I'm holding it off. Another good NPCs video. Oh, I should have mentioned earlier, Brother Dominic was in my first good NPCs video. So, like, you know, potential allies and friends of the players, rather than, you know, counteracting my minor villains videos. Oh, and Vilnius was in one of the minor villains one, funny enough. Yeah, so I'm going to do that, I think. There'll be Hazlan Part 2 with the tower. I'll probably see that being in a month's time, I imagine, maybe a bit longer. Hopefully before Christmas or not long after Christmas. And yeah, if you haven't already subscribed, please do. If you haven't seen my other videos, I've covered off a whole bunch of other domains of dread, including Volkovnia, the Carnival, Tobag, Sea of Sorrows, Forlorn, Daemonlu, a few others I've probably forgotten. But yeah, and a whole bunch of other Ravenloft videos as well. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, Mist Wanderers.